Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we are immersing ourselves in a topic that really, it touches every single organization, every leader, no matter the sector. We're talking about financial stewardship.
Hmm.
And when we say stewardship, we're not just talking about quarterly reports or, balancing the books.
Not at all.
We are going way beyond the spreadsheets to look at it as a leadership discipline, as ethics, as long-term sustainability, and even the profound philosophical frameworks that shape how we manage resources.
That's absolutely right. The source material we've compiled for you explores this from, well, a really powerful dual perspective. It combines the sharp, strategic rigor of modern business management with a deeply rooted ethical and spiritual accountability structure. Our mission today is to quickly but thoroughly unpack how these two lenses, the practical and the principled, really merge into a single non-negotiable leadership competency for you.
And the core insight that just jumps off the page and it really shifts your perspective on leadership failure is this. The sources argue that organizations collapse and leaders stumble far more frequently because of financial misjudgment
Yeah.
than they do from some ambitious, risky, or even a misguided vision. It's the small, quiet financial decisions, the ones made daily, that are shaping destinies long before any big strategy meeting.
It's the silent killer, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, the uncomfortable truth the source material just relentlessly confronts is that organizational failure, it rarely looks like a dramatic overnight implosion.
An erosion.
It's an erosion. Exactly.
And a
It
crack.
happens slowly, silently, through scattered spending, a culture of reactive budgeting, and this damaging habit of treating financial stewardship as an afterthought, something you just delegate to the accounting department.
Instead of a core leadership discipline.
A foundational one.
So if financial stability is more often lost through that kind of erosion than some big explosion, then it stands to reason that financial wisdom has to be proactive.
Precisely. In today's volatile markets, look around. Inflation's unpredictable, donor confidence can swing wildly, technology demands constant, expensive upgrades. The sources make it crystal clear that mastering this skill has shifted from being a nice-to-have to a non-negotiable strategic advantage. Leaders who lack that financial foresight are, quite simply, losing ground every single day.
Okay, so let's unpack this concept of stewardship as a necessary mindset, because the sources are adamant. This isn't just about, technical skill. It's a mental shift. It's about seeing financial resources not primarily as constraints that limit you, but as powerful levers for achieving long-term strength.
It fundamentally changes the conversation in the boardroom. If you're only focused on constraints, you budget with fear, with scarcity.
Right.
But if you view resources as levers, you budget with foresight, with intentionality.
Yeah.
This means treating every single expenditure, from office supplies to a huge capital project, as an investment that is strictly accountable to future impact.
Okay, but I have to ask, if we view financial resources as these powerful levers, how do we stop that mindset from turning into, reckless risk-taking? Or just pure speculation? Where is that critical line between a wise investment, which always involves some risk, and just irresponsible gambling?
That's an excellent and a necessary question. And the sources draw a very clear boundary. Reckless risk is driven by short-term gain or ego. Wise investment is tied directly back to your mission and your long-term capacity.
Okay.
The core question for any leader is, are my financial decisions today positioning the organization to not just survive, but to thrive 5, 10, 20 years from now? If your spending is purely reactive, just solving yesterday's problems, you have crossed the line.
The source defines this leadership role beautifully. It calls the leader not just a manager of numbers, but a guardian of the organization's future capacity. That framing just elevates the responsibility so much. The warning is stark. Outdated incremental budgeting habits are not merely inefficient, they're strategically dangerous. You risk being outpaced by competitors who allocate their resources with, surgical clarity and intention.
And this is where the source material takes its profound turn, grounding financial stewardship in a really deep ethical and spiritual framework. For the believer, managing resources is presented as a sacred trust.
An act of worship, even.
Fundamentally an act of worship. It's about participating in what the source calls the divine economy.
And what's fascinating here is the core premise of ultimate ownership. This isn't just a philosophical idea. It's the ultimate starting point for every single financial decision. The source backs this up, citing scripture, notably Psalm 24 and Haggai 2, which assert that God is the proprietor. He declares, "The silver is mine and the gold is mine."
And that truth It radically shifts our entire understanding of financial management.
Yep.
If God owns everything, not just, the big endowments, but the change in your pocket, the intellectual property of your business, then we're reduced or maybe elevated to the role of managers.
Tenants, stewards, not owners.
Not owners. And this has immediate practical implications.
Well, it eliminates the ego, for one thing. If I'm the ultimate owner, I can spend it however I want. If I'm the steward, I must spend it according to the owner's instruction and purpose.
Exactly. This perspective implies 4 profound principles for stewardship that leaders just have to internalize. It's like their ethical compass.
Okay.
First, everything is God's property. It eliminates the illusion of personal ownership right away. Second, we are managers, not owners, meaning we are bound by the owner's purpose.
Right.
Third, purposeful allocation, making sure every dollar spent aligns with that purpose. And fourth, accountability, knowing we are ultimately accountable to God for how we managed his assets.
That accountability principle is the driver for diligence. Okay, let's transition now and unpack this with some of the powerful historical examples the source provides of both foresight and failure. Because history shows us exactly what happens when these principles are followed and when they are not.
Yeah, well, you can look all the way back to Joseph in Genesis as, the definitive masterclass in strategic financial planning at a national scale. He wasn't just managing the books for Egypt, he was implementing a 14-year economic policy.
Wow.
He faithfully stewarded the nation's resources by implementing a 7-year plan of massive agricultural surplus storage, which was then followed by 7 years of calculated famine relief.
What stands out about Joseph's plan isn't just the saving part, but the foresight. He used today's surplus, the financial lever, to secure tomorrow's capacity, the future strength.
Yes.
That is proactive, not reactive, budgeting on a massive scale.
And the sources emphasize that the mandate for stewardship goes way beyond mere preservation. It requires multiplication. The parable of the talents is used to illustrate the responsibility to wisely invest and grow what you've been given, not just, keep it safe.
And here's what gets really interesting. The condemnation for the servant who just buried the money, calling him the wicked and slothful servant. It highlights that preservation without growth is actually a failure of stewardship.
It is. The expectation is increased.
So it implies that good stewardship involves measured, mission-aligned risk and productivity. You can't just sit on your resources out of fear.
Conversely, history is just filled with these stark cautionary tales of mismanagement. When empires viewed themselves as the ultimate owners rather than stewards, the source points to the decline of great empires, and they offer these palpable lessons in fiscal failure.
Take the Roman Empire, for instance. It was crippled not by a single barbarian invasion, but by a slow financial erosion. The sources detail how Rome suffered from excessive military spending that constantly outpaced its ability to tax chronic currency debasement, literally lowering the silver content in their coins.
Inflating their way out of problems.
And prioritizing immediate political needs, like unsustainable welfare systems, over long-term fiscal health. They sacrificed sustainability for short-term political appeasement.
A similar tragic case played out with the Spanish Empire in the 16th and 17th centuries. They suddenly found themselves flush with immense raw wealth, gold and silver from the New World, but they mismanaged it spectacularly.
How so?
Instead of using that capital for productive, diversified investment in things like manufacturing or agriculture, they used it largely for lavish royal consumption and these incredibly costly, protracted wars.
And the economic result of that misallocation was?
Massive hyperinflation. They flooded the European market with gold, which devalued their own currency and made their domestic products too expensive to compete internationally. They effectively financed their own economic decline because they mistook raw wealth for strategic capacity.
These historical failures powerfully reinforce the danger of what the source calls the temptation of the immediate. This is the pitfall of prioritizing short-term gains, whether that means deferring critical building maintenance or engaging in aggressive, deceptive accounting like we saw with the collapse of Enron. You borrow from tomorrow to look good today, and eventually tomorrow demands payment.
And the lesson is just consistent across time and sector. Successful stewardship requires intentionality. And intentionality, in turn, requires systems. If you want to move beyond financial anxiety, you need intentional navigation tools.
The sources provide some really practical frameworks for this. One budgeting method they highlight for its sheer discipline is zero-based budgeting, or ZBB.
ZBB is strategically invaluable because it forces leaders to fight that common tendency toward incremental budgeting. The practice of just adding 3% to last year's line items without really justifying it.
Right, the default.
It's the default.
Yeah.
In ZBB, every single dollar of expense must be justified and approved for each new budget period. Every line item starts at zero.
This forces true prioritization, doesn't it? If everything is starting at zero, you have to prove the strategic necessity of a program before you can fund it.
You do.
It transforms budgeting from a kind of clerical exercise into a real strategic planning session?
Absolutely. If a leader has a pool of capital, ZBB forces them to determine which programs genuinely deliver the highest value against the mission, rather than just funding the programs that have always existed. It's an optimization tool.
Another framework provided, particularly for ministries and nonprofits, is fund accounting. And the sources emphasize this is critical not just for good governance, but for legal and ethical integrity. It's about honoring donor intent.
Fund accounting is so essential because it moves beyond a single balance sheet and it meticulously tracks assets according to their use restrictions. You have to distinguish between three crucial types of funds, and neglecting this is a serious fiduciary risk for any leader.
So walk us through those three types again and why they matter so much for integrity.
Sure. First, you have unrestricted funds. Leadership can use these at their discretion, as long as it aligns with the overall mission. Second, there are temporarily restricted funds.
Okay.
These are funds restricted either for a specific purpose, like building a new wing, or for a specific time period, like covering payroll for the next quarter. And that's designated by the donor. Leaders who violate this, they break trust and potentially violate contract law.
And the third?
Permanently restricted funds, which are typically endowments. With these, only the earnings or interest generated by the principal can be spent. The principal itself has to remain intact forever. Meticulous fund accounting ensures the organization can't accidentally or intentionally dip into restricted funds to cover an operating shortfall.
Which is often the first sign of an organization collapsing under financial pressure.
Just a huge red flag.
What's fascinating is how this principled stewardship directly translates into practical strategy for sustainability. The sources identify that a sustainable organization has to have diversified funding streams. They liken it to the scattering of seed rather than relying on a single crop. If one revenue stream dries up, the organization doesn't immediately fail.
And diversification has to be paired with robust financial controls. These are the internal checks and balances, things like segregation of duties, where the person who manages cash is not the same person who records the transactions.
Right.
And regular independent audits. These measures are not just bureaucratic hurdles. They actively prevent fraud, they protect the leaders, and they fundamentally build trust with stakeholders and donors.
So we've covered the mindset and the necessary systems. The ultimate actionable tool provided in the source material is the Resource Allocation Map, or RAM. This isn't just a budget, it's a map designed to strategically track spending against value creation.
The genius of the RAM is that it shifts the leader's focus away from simply asking, how much money did we spend on marketing, to asking, what value did that marketing spending create toward achieving our mission?
Let's make this concrete for the listener. If someone is building their RAM, what does that look like in practice?
Okay, so we can imagine a nonprofit focused on literacy. When they're building their map, they first define their mission and core values. That's their compass. Then they identify key strategic objectives, like increase third-grade reading proficiency by 15%. Those are their destinations.
Now comes the critical part, linking the spending to the value.
Exactly. They link spending to key performance indicators, or KPIs, value metrics. So if they allocate $50,000 to a new tutoring program, the value metric isn't just we ran the program.
Right.
It's how many students showed measurable improvement, or what was the cost per student to achieve reading competency. The RAM compels them to justify that $50,000 against its expected return on mission value. If the metric is poor, the allocation decision is immediately flagged for review.
So the RAM requires this regular review and adjustment, compelling leaders to consistently ask those crucial questions. Is this the most effective use of our resources? And are we building for long-term sustainability, or are we just prioritizing short-term fixes that will cost us more later?
It demands brutal honesty and constant course correction, which is really the definition of diligent stewardship.
We've covered so much. The strategic necessity of financial stewardship, its deep roots in ethics and faith, according to these sources, the crucial difference between being an owner and a manager, and the practical tools needed to implement that foresight, like ZBBB, fund accounting, and the Resource Allocation Map.
When you adopt these disciplines, responsible stewardship transforms financial management from, a paralyzing burden into a strategic, even a spiritual exercise. It's a holistic journey that demands integrity, diligence, and wisdom. It demands that we live and lead with a view toward enduring impact.
And the sources remind us, pulling back to that ultimate philosophical framework, that financial decisions today become part of your leadership legacy. The parable of the talents shows us that the master returns and demands an account from his servants. It's the ultimate stewardship report card.
Which raises one final, important question for you to consider. Something to mull over as you navigate your own organization's resources. If every financial decision you make today becomes part of your leadership legacy, what story will that legacy tell a year or a decade from now?